Let's start this morning with Jasna, who's going to speak on endorsement and effects of the ethos of conflict in Serbia, Serb-Albanian conflict. The floor is yours, Jasna.
Thank you, Sean. Hello, good morning. I'm going to discuss the psychological concept of how individuals actually fight with prolonged conflict and trauma. The name of the presentation and the topic of discussion is endorsement of the effects and the effects of ethos of conflict in Serbia. But first I would like to again say thank you to Nebojša for inviting not only me but also your students to this conference, summer school. I think it's really a great opportunity for all of us to discuss those issues. The paper was written with co-authors. One is Francesca Di Napoli. She was my Erasmus student at the Faculty of Media and Communication. She's coming from the University of Milano di Coca, and she has recently defended her master thesis. And Živojin Đorđević from the Institute for Political Studies. Actually, that's how we get the data that we are going to analyze in this presentation. So,
actually, Francesca is with us.
Okay, hi, Francesca. Oh, we don't see her. Yeah. Francesca and I actually analyze the data and discuss the topic that we are going to present to me personally, but also she can answer to some questions maybe later on. And well, I'm a psychologist, so this is going to be a psychological perspective, as I said before, of the topics that we discussed previously this week. So how actually individuals behave while living in a prolonged conflict, and what are the psychological concepts and barriers maybe for reconciliation. And the intractable conflict actually are full of different kinds of trauma. So later on I will present some data and some statistics. But first, just to introduce the concept of ethos of conflict for those maybe who are not familiar with the concept, and to give a short overview of the Serb-Albanian conflict, although we are from the region, almost all of us, so I don't think that it's a new topic for this audience. So why actually we choose a Serb-Albanian conflict to analyze and to discuss is that for the national identity, Serb national identity, Kosovo issue actually continues to be very important in building identification. And I will just say few key points that are very important and belong to Kosovo history. First one is that at the Kosovo, that was the first made or built medieval state, Raška, and one of the leaders was Stefan Nemanja, and how important is even today in terms of national identity. I put a photo of Stefan Nemanja, a new monument built in the center of Belgrade, a huge one, very similar to monuments in Skopje. So he was the leader of the Raška, and the second key point for the, let's say, national identity of the right-wing political oriented persons, the population in Serbia, is the Battle of Kosovo. Actually, the day of the battle is still celebrated today as Vidovdan in Serbia, as a constitutive element of Serb ethnic and national identities. But to move from the past and from the history to the more, let's say, recent conflict or topics, after the Second World War, Kosovo was given more autonomy within Serbia as well as Vojvodina. And during the Yugoslavia, all nationalism was actually kept together by repression of that time. However, after Tito's death, there were growing economic crises and there was a pool of independence from different ethnic groups. We all remember and know that very well. After that, several wars starting from the beginning in Slovenia, then Croatia, Bosnia, and later on the latest one was in Kosovo. So the major two events, I would say, helped actually escalation the conflict in the recent past between Serbia and Kosovo. The first one was, of course, the entrance of Slobodan Milošević to the political scene. And the second one was the dissolution of Yugoslavia, and those events actually started and escalated, helped the conflict to be escalated even in the violent ways. So under these circumstances, Serbia and Kosovo actually aim to go in two completely opposite directions. While Serbia and Milošević tried to limit by all means and repress Albanians living in Kosovo. On the other hand, Kosovo continues to ask and to fight for independence. They made a new constitution, and then for Serbia, non-official elections, for them elections for independence. And after the Rambouillet in 1999, those negotiations failed. So NATO bombing started and ended actually in somehow reached peace negotiations. But still we have a lot of huge problems on a political sphere, also on a, let's say, smaller group scale. So formal agreement was then reached. But still there are open questions like number of human lives and material losses on both sides. And of course, currently very important issue that Kosovo remained non-recognized by Serbia, recognized by almost all Western world, but not by China, Russia, and some EU countries, and Serbia. So it becomes really a huge barrier for political negotiations because, and actually a barrier to EU integrations of both countries, because Kosovo still remained independence, Kosovo independence still remained one-sided. But I suppose that almost all of us are familiar with those events of the recent past. So we can say that intractable conflict is present here for all of us, although I will actually discuss only Serbian population. Of course, I think it will be really very important to survey the Albanians of Kosovo, but right now we have only this kind of data. So therefore we will focus on Serbian view of this conflict because we are analyzing this kind of statistical data. So intractable conflict is present regarding Serbian-Albanian conflict among the adults and also not only adults in Serbia. What are the definition or maybe the indicators of intractable conflict? They are existential and irresolvable, resistant to change, incapable, so people are incapable of peace. They are central, last for generation, constantly present in political discussions, in media, and actually it belongs to a core actually discussion or maybe negotiation between two parts. Also, the conflict is perceived by both sides like zero-sum nature, meaning that people perceive that there can be only one winner. It's not a question of negotiation, that somebody lose something but win something. But for intractable conflicts, the one of the indicators is that it has been seen as a zero-sum nature. And it also requires extensive investment of all psychological resources And I'm going to discuss here today some of the psychological resources and the effects of ethos of conflict that can be seen as the consequences of prolonged conflict or exposure to trauma of some kind. So what are the socio-psychological barriers to peace? We have different kinds of issues or topics here. We have structural issues. If you actually have attitudes that are really belong to ethos of conflict attitudes, they are complex, they are systematic, and they somehow fulfill some basic needs for identity, security, justice. Also can serve as a motivational, let's say, issues because it can trigger behavior and it can help people to involve in political action. And that is actually the variables that I'm going to present here. How political conservatism can influence ethos of conflict, and then can be the effect of this correlation resides or resolves in the effect is political, negative political action. And we have also emotional issues. Those are frequent emotions in intractable conflicts like hate and fear that are very much associated and present in the prolonged conflict while people are living in them. So the collective conflict narrative, one definition of it is, I put it here, a Hamak definition, a collective narrative that brings the society together and served as a social glue, a way to see the world that interpret events, express solidarity and feelings of social identity. And ethos of conflict actually belong to one of is one of the collective conflict narratives that we are going to investigate today. So they have, I mean, a huge impact on the attitudes that we serve and also on the memory. How and when the events are actually remembered and how we actually employ the use of collective memory, how we present them, and how we present the both sides and remember the both sides that are involved in the conflict. In-group supporting narratives are propagated at the individual level and also at the collective level of both sides, and they are often pushed to the international context in order to receive material, economical support, political support, and they might have serious consequences on the personal level and also on the group level. So just a few conflict signs that are, or images that are present today in Serbia and also in Albania and Kosovo. They are, I mean, Kosovo and Serbia are engaged in really a disturbing war of symbols, words, political provocations, and maybe just to remind you of few of them in the recent past. In everyday politics, maybe you remember the train that are built and made in Serbia with the Serbian flag, and inside it there was symbols of Orthodox religion, and it was aimed to send and to actually serve the people from Kosovska Mitrovica to Belgrade. And it was like a huge provocation from the Serbian side. On the other hand, just to mention, for example, sports manifestation in 2016, while the football match was stopped and ended because the great Albanian flag was flying above the players. Also in culture, we all have this kind of, let's say, communication. One of them was when Dua Lipa, a famous pop singer, actually tweeted a great Albanian map on her Twitter account. And not to mention, but I can, all of them, and it's impossible because they are present almost in all aspects of our life. So those are conflict signs and images that can be easily found on internet, but also not only on internet, on the buildings in the center of Belgrade, or maybe in Serbia as well, where showing the flag of Serbia on the territory of Kosovo. But also we have similar images on the other side. We have conflict images at the Kosovo territory, always actually communicating the map of Great Albania that have involving part of Montenegro, Macedonia, Greece, and of course Kosovo. So those are the images that all of us actually are exposed. Sometimes we notice them living in Serbia, sometimes not, but as on the previous slide, as I present, they are actually everywhere, you know, those symbols are on the buildings, on the billboards, in the newspapers. So sometimes it's not really conscious that we perceive them, but they are really frequently present in our everyday life. So let's go back a bit to explain the ethos of conflict developed by Bartal, famous social psychologist from the Middle East. Of course, the living conditions down there is similar to ours because they are also in the Middle East facing the prolonged conflict that from time to time escalated to violent conflicts. And Bartal actually publishes extensively on this topic on different perspectives. The intercorrelations of ethos of conflict with some other psychological variables, the political socialization of the kids, that is also very important because it shows that there is a huge intergenerational transmissions and very fast and long-lasting transmission of ethos of conflict from the parents to the kids. But the indicators of the ethos of conflict are those mentioned here. The justiveness of the in-group goals. So my group has the rights, we are right, our demands are existential, but the out-group goals are meaningless, malevolent, and they are bad. Then the security indicator. Since in the prolonged conflict, people are actually exposed to constant threat and danger, ethos of conflict actually provides them and helps them to have the basic need for security. It's somehow easier to face the conflict where you belong to a group and have a strong national identity. Positive collective self-image, that's the next indicator. It's an ethnocentric tendency about the goodness and heroism of the outgroup, good morality and justiceness. We are always right. We have the right. In the past, we have been suffered. We are victims of this and that. In groups, victimization. So we are victims of our enemy. Delegitimizing the out-group and legitimizing the in-group goals, denying the humanity of the enemy, always seeing the violent acts in the out-group but not in the in-group. Patriotism, that is dedication to the country, to the gathered goal, to the loyalty and willingness to sacrifice lives. It's really a huge emotional impact that can actually be present in each individual. Unity, bringing the society together as a whole against the enemy, united together in solidarity and peace. The in-group, that is important. The in-group is, let's say, wanting the peace, but the out-group is against it. So we see that we, in the negotiations, are the good guys, but the other part, the enemy, is not. And always discuss the obstacles that are made or proposed by the enemy, not criticism of the in-group members and in-group goals at all. Of course, ethos of conflict is similar to other psychological and not only psychological concepts, so it's intercorrelated with political ideology, and we are going to discuss the numbers here. It can be seen sometimes as the same, but in this survey it's not, so it's really connected and highly correlated with political right-wing ideology, conservative attitudes, view as the world as will. But what is the most important for our discussion here today is how how ethos of conflict attitudes can actually influence the political action, the negative political collective action. And there are also extensive publishing on its connection to militant extremist, not only mindset, but extremist action of the population. The role of ethos of conflict, I mentioned a few of them, are huge in the emotional sphere, cognitive sphere, and behavior sphere. So in the emotional sphere, it helps people to cope with distress in a trauma and in a prolonged conflict, and coping with threat, with anxiety, and gives meaning and keep control in the stressful situation, maintaining a positive image of the self and his own society, and shape the sense of uniqueness as a part of collective group. On the other hand, there are also a huge number of data that confirm that ethos of conflict has also consequences in the cognitive sphere. So support decision making, how? In selecting the information, attention focusing of the personal, of the individual, but not only the perception of the social situation in which we live, but also the interpretation of the events and also the evaluation of the events. And the memory retrieval that I mentioned before, how and when actually different information is used and activated, and behavioral sphere. It can lead and guide behavior and help people to be engaged in political action. So to participate in conservative right-wing collective action. Just a few words regarding collective political action. A lot in the psychological perspective has been investigated regarding this progressive, system supporting, system challenging collective action. But we have different kind of political action. We can have progressive versus conservative, system supporting versus system challenging, or right-wing versus left-wing political action. And here we are going to actually see the data, how ethos of conflict is connected to this conservative right-wing political action. So what are the hypotheses of our survey or our study? We have three hypotheses. First was based on previous studies of this kind in Serbia, that we will measure and see the high endorsement of ethos of conflict narrative regarding Serb-Albanian intractable conflict. The other hypothesis was this one that I mentioned, that conservative political ideology actually serves as a basis for the ethos of conflict, and then ethos of conflict actually has the effects in involving in political action of the right wing. So conservative political ideology is linked to political activism by a mediating role of ethos of conflict. And the third hypothesis was actually we wanted to see whether there are some social, psychological, social, demographic variables that can define those people who are endorsing ethos of conflict the most. Among them is age, gender, and education. I think that we measured only that in our analysis right now. So the main hypothesis is the ethos of conflict is strongly connected with political conservatism, and it pushes the member of groups involved in the conflict to be more politically active in this right-wing political action. So for them, that's the goal, how to have total commitment to the cause. So in that line, we actually conducted a national representative survey in December 2019. That was a grant from the Institute of Political Studies. We have actually surveyed around 1,600 people, and this is the structure of our sample, showing that it's more or less actually representing the adult population in Serbia. The numbers that we are going to see can be actually interpreted as the let's say, numbers and thoughts for the whole adult population in Serbia.
And
So,
where it is done in Belgrade?
No, the whole Serbia.
Whole Serbia?
Yes, I didn't mention it here. Yes, in
Without
whole Serbia.
Kosovo.
Without Kosovo, yes.
Okay.
And Vojvodina, sorry.
Yes, Vojvodina as well, no Kosovo. So only Serbia plus Vojvodina and without Kosovo. Yes, we didn't have this like north part of Kosovo, only Serbian, south of Serbia. Covered although with some Albanian municipalities, but it's always very hard to conduct a survey there, so there are only few of the Albanians actually. So it's like a Serbian population without Kosovo. Those are the instruments. What did we measure? I mentioned that before. We are not going. I'm not going into details here. So we measured political conservatism by the scale consisting of 6 items, like do you see yourself as a right or left wing, political right or left, global, national, Euro-Atlantic, Euro-Asian orientation, neoliberal, social, atheism, religious. For the Ethos of Conflict, we use the scale actually structured by Bartal, but created by Bartal, but then it was implemented and measured in several different surveys by our colleagues. So we reframed a bit and revised the scale and used 28 or 29 items from this scale. But also it explains, I mean, in statistical terms, it's really a good measure of ethos of conflict. Political activism, I would mention that as a limitation of this study, because we measured it via 6 items from different kind of involvement in political action, from I would sign a petition, I would protest, and let's say I would, how often people actually are engaged in political action. From the lowest engagement, I often express my opinion on political issues. I'm going to wear a T-shirt with the signs Kosovo is Serbia and things like that. 2, I would volunteer in organization or participate in the meetings. And we have socio-demographic variables. And here are the results. This is the actual endorsement of ethos of conflict among the adult population in Serbia. On the scale from 1 to 5, we have mean 3.5. So this is like shift to the right a bit. So we actually confirmed the first hypothesis that there is a high endorsement of ethos of conflict while viewing the Serb-Albanian conflict. Correlations between the variables that we measured. So we have a high correlation between ethos of conflict and political conservatism. It's 0.52, and this statistically significant. But still, we cannot say how can we divide those two constructs in terms of psychological concepts. Political conservatism actually is content, there is no content like specific one that we measured in ethos of conflict. So this is more there is no context in it, but for Ethos of Conflict we have specific actually topics that we ask regarding specific Serb-Albanian conflict. And among this is interesting, among the socio-demographic variables, we have only found statistical significance between age, but not with gender and education. That might sometimes or maybe indirectly shows how education is structured in the countries in conflict right now. We conducted also the regression analysis showing that actually political action is explained or can be predicted measuring or by the ethos of conflict and also political conservatism and age, but not the other variables as shown in the correlation matrix. But what is here the interesting part is that we confirmed also the second hypothesis. So political orientation, conservative orientation directly impacts the political action and also indirectly via the ethos of conflict attitudes and constructs, and those are the numbers that confirm this connection. But it is not straightforward. This graph is showing the orange line is high in political conservatism. So those who are high in political conservatism and high in ethos of conflict, they will be mostly engaged in negative political action or conservative political action. But those who are low, this is the blue line, who are low in political conservatism, involving ethos of conflict would lead to less political engagement in some conservative political actions. And the effect of age is, let's say, we can see the moderation effect of age. That means this is the orange line as well, that show the older people. So older people are mostly prone to endorsement of ethos of conflict and also involved in a negative political action. So the orange line shows that for the older people, those who are actually endorsing more ethos of conflict, they are more engaged in a political action, but not so much for the younger population, and that is the green line. Let's say green line. So for them, the high endorsement of ethos of conflict would not lead that much to the involvement in political action. So main results, I briefly mentioned them in the previous slide. So high endorsement of ethos of conflict among the Serbian population, strong correlation with political conservatism, and then mediation of ethos of conflict between political conservatism and political action, and age being the most important variable in explaining ethos of conflict. So the importance of this topic actually is not only scientific but also practical. As we see, so studying ethos of conflict is important for the society involved in the conflict because it's also an international problem, being the one in the Serbian-Albanian issue. And conflict-related narratives tend, as we see, to strengthen the barriers of the peacemaking process and representing the barriers not only on the group level but also on the personal level. So that is why it is important for scientific and practical investigation, and serves as a barrier to peace actually on individual level. So the limitations of this study, well, we can discuss them after the presentation, but I would say, for example, that's the measure of, in a statistical way, that's the measure of political activism, because we did not ask actually in which specific political action are you involved in, but we can indirectly say that they are right-wing, because we initially thought to measure any political action, and indirectly we can see that it's right-wing, but it can also maybe present the other kind, the other type of political action. Then we only measure those few variables. In this extensive academic literature, there are also all sorts of psychological variables that actually are a predictor of ethos of conflict, like psychological distress, perceived threat, support to compromise. So we don't have this kind of measure in this survey, and of course it's dated like a year ago and a year and a half ago, and really it would be nice to have a longitudinal data and to see how endorsement of ethos of conflict is changing during time. But even with this one survey, it is a nice representation of what is going on among the adult population in Serbia. What can be done? Of course, I always want to see the practical implementations of some academic discussions. So there is a huge, let's say, proposals and programs that can be done in the conflict situations. Peace education is some of them, the intervention of that kind need to be addressed to not only persons but also families, group of younger people or adult people. There are truth commissions in situations in which rivalry sides stand together, discuss about their own experience, and the dialogue can actually endorse the empathy and understanding of each other. But those contacts actually might be need to be controlled in order to have a positive impact on the individuals and then on the group level. And all those strategies and processes require actually a participation of institutions and politicians with concrete actions. They need to support actually the peace programs and the peace narratives. Unfortunately, it has not been seen, at least I can say, in Serbian political discourse, but I suppose that's similar on the other side. It's really a huge topic in news every day, and it's not a peaceful discourse that we are facing and we are exposed to. And for the end, let's hope that somehow we will have more peace images and signs of reconciliation and peace in the future, and not the one from the beginning of this presentation. And I can only hope that those kind of surveys and analysis would help maybe the policies and politicians to develop actually some kind of negotiations that are going to be successful. And thank you, that's the end of my presentation. I would like to thank, of course, the co-authors that we are working together in analyzing and shaping this presentation and paper, Institute for Political Studies that actually give the resources for the survey, field organizers, and of course our respondents.